Hello, Miss Grace. My name is Lee Wai Kit, together with my teammates Lee Zhan Xiong, Lin Shikai, and Au Silong. Today, we're going to talk about the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on global poverty and inequality. So, the COVID-19 pandemic has a devastating impact on poverty levels and inequality. Women alongside the poor, elderly, disabled, and migrant populations have borne the brunt from the fallout of the pandemic. Around the world, responses to the first and second waves of the COVID-19 pandemic are understandably focuses on reducing infections and fatalities. There are also redoubled efforts to avoid the negative economic consequences of the outbreak, especially in relation to the job, productivity, and growth. But the pandemic is an economic wrecking ball with intergenerational consequences. Global growth has plummeted, and this furthermore has poverty levels are increasing and inequality is accelerating between and within countries. Surging inequality is dangerous with knock-on effects on everything from rising crime to reactionary nationalism. The COVID-19 pandemic is a social and economic crisis just as much as it is a health one. Its repercussions, severe and far-reaching, are being felt across the world. From school closures to devastated industries and millions of jobs lost, the social and economic costs of the pandemic are many and varied. COVID-19 is threatening to widen inequalities everywhere, undermine progress on global poverty and clean energy and more. To slow the spread of the virus, schools are closed across the world. 1 year into the pandemic, almost half of the world's students are still affected by school closure. Millions of girls in some countries might not be going back at all, putting them at risk of adolescent pregnancy, child marriage, and violence. Business closed too, leading to equivalent of 255 million full-time jobs lost in terms of working hours in 2020. Among the worst hits are workers in the informal economy, young people and women. Any economic recovery will likely be uneven, leading to greater inequality in the coming years. Women have harder hit economically by the pandemic because they are a large proportion of the workers in sectors severely affected by COVID-19, including accommodation and food services, and in frontline occupations such as the health and social care sectors. With the closure of schools, they have also take on more care responsibilities at home. Whether through job losses or school closures, the pandemic threatens to undo decades of progress on gender inequality. Next. With the COVID-19 has been slowing down progress on clean energy too, at least temporarily, by curbing investments and delaying the expansion of clean energy technologies. There has been some positive climate news. The global energy-related CO2 emissions fell by 5.8% in 2020, the largest ever decline in global CO2 emissions in history. But that's only a short-term effect of lockdowns and not a sustained change. In fact, emissions are expected to rise by 4.8% in 2021, the second highest rate in history, as the demand for coal, oil, and gas rebounds with the economy. And I'll pass on to Zhang Xiong to present the next point. Thank you.
Um, Good afternoon, Ms. Grace. Now I will expand on the point of extreme in global poverty. When COVID-19 erupted, many countries respond by locking up major parts of their economics. This lockdown reduced income and employment and lead to an increase in extreme poverty. In 2021, the desire for lockdowns is relatively small. It improved the economic consequence, but at the cost of an increase in COVID-19 cases and COVID-19 related death. In 2021, the stringency index for COVID-19 gradually decreased in individual countries. In many development countries, vaccines are being developed, pandemics are receding, and economic activity is rising again. If rising economic activity stimulate demand for product and commodities from raw and middle income countries, it could reduce poverty level in those countries. However, poor countries may not see a turnaround in COVID after all. These countries appear to be lagging in vaccine rollout, and with the prospect of a new wave of COVID-19, further delays in vaccine rollout and new variants of the virus could significantly worsen the economic outlook. The strength of the country is the main factor. It shows that declines in poverty are more likely to occur in high and middle income countries, and that low income countries may face further increase in poverty. In one sense, high and middle income countries are reverting to pre-COVID-19 change in poverty, albeit at higher levels. But for the world's poor richest economy, the story is different. These countries are outperforming the pre-pandemic change in poverty. Not only are poverty rates in this country declining, but the gap with the poverty rates expected before COVID-19 is also narrowing. In low-income countries, the opposite is true. Poverty is increasing and increasing faster than expected before the pandemic. According to World Bank projections, poverty in low-income countries will increase by 2.7% in 2021 compared to the 0.2% increase project before the pandemic. Thus, the impact of COVID-19 on global poverty is not only still present, but worsening. Next. Now I will expand on the point of income inequality. When difference in GDP per capita are weighted by population, inequality between countries increased significantly during 2020. It is attributed to COVID-19, and India is an example. India's economy concentrated sharply during the pandemic, and it suffered significantly in terms of mortality and economic performance, even before the massive second wave of influences occurred in 2021. India will take more time to complete its economic recovery than other countries, and the economic disease will last for many years. A country population affects its GDP at all time, and pandemics exacerbate weightage inequality between countries. During a pandemic, hundreds of millions of people face a very serious trade-off every day between saving safely at home or facing the threat of infection, and providing food for their families. Many people still choose to perform labor to provide for their families. Long-term evidence from many countries show that those who enter the labor market during a severe recession earn less than those who enter before and after. And then this difference persists for many years. By inducing a massive global recession, COVID-19 has undoubtedly created new inequalities. That's all. Now I will pass to Sirong to expand on his point.
Hi, good afternoon, Miss. So I will explain for the food security and food supply chain disruption. COVID-19 poses a serious threat to global food security through various transmission mechanisms. From what is currently known, the worst of this threat is the global economic recession, causing many to lose income and leaving many vulnerable people unable to afford the food they need. Income denies not only reduce demand for food, but also induce shift in the mix of the products consumed, notably resulting in less consumption of more nutrient-rich foods and relative more of calorie-rich foods. Other threats arise from the disruption in agriculture improved markets, from production, marketing, and distribution of food caused by the needs of social distancing to combat the global health crisis. So next is for the food supply chain caused by the COVID-19 are also affecting food. Although the food supply chain is relatively resilient, restriction on labor mobility and declining demand has disrupted the food chain. The food service has been particularly affected. Many more people in urban areas are employed. Mainly in the tourism and category industry, traditional food systems are less connected with non-agricultural sector, so they are less affected by recession on labor mobility, while modern food system and often use particularly integrated system, which control their own supply chain are therefore usually able to adjust and adapt. However, the food system transitioning from traditional to modern, their supply chains are no longer and storage, transportation, and service are feel fragmented, so they are more fragile in many countries. Restriction on the movement of people have reduced the supply of higher labor, resulting in a shortage of labor for harvesting and other agricultural activities and interruption in transportation. For example, in Ethiopia, restriction of the movement of people have affected the labor supply of rice farmers. About 70% of rice farmers in the country rely on temporary workers. In addition, perishable products in the supply chains are most affected. Another example is Senegal. Some small fresh fruit and vegetable companies was affected by traditional market conditions and social distancing requirements, which eventually led to food corruption and loss of income. Other than that, food insecurity and reduced religious status. This because increasing poverty, declining incomes, and employment opportunities, as well as the disruption of the food supply chain, are the notable consequences of increasing food insecurity and continuing disruption of natural status. Declining and the reduced supply of the perishable products such as fruits, vegetables, and animal derived for food all have impact on diet quality and diversity. Study conducted in Guatemala and China have shown that families will lose the purchasing power of the production and change their purchasing patterns, tending to increase the proportion of cheaper starch staple in the household food consumption, while in other countries, the consumption of cheap ultra-processed food has increased. In addition, the blockade has led to closure of schools and daycare centers that originally provide important meals and nutritional supplies for hundreds of millions of children. In the early stage of the epidemic, projections for 118 low and middle income countries indicate that there will be 9.5 million wasting children. The new current phenomenon epidemic is harsh reminder the poor and other vulnerable groups are more vulnerable to shocks. Next is the gender inequalities being exacerbated. Despite some progress over previous decades, gender gaps will still considerable and persistent in the labor markets around the world because before the onset of the COVID-19 crisis, including gaps in labor force participation, wages, and quality of employment. In the light of these pre-crisis gender inequalities, the COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting women workers in four main ways. First, almost 510 million or 40% of all employed women around the world work in hard-hit sector. Second is 55 million or 72.3% domestic workers around the world were at significant risk of losing their jobs and incomes due to the lockdown and the lack of effective social security coverage. Third is women represent more than 70% of those employed in the health of social work. Through these women represented the bulk of frontline workers who face the direct risk of responding to the virus. They tend to be engaged fighting low skill and low paid jobs in this sector. Finally, closure of early childhood education center, care service and school, along with the unavailability of older relatives to provide support, have exacerbated to the unequal distribution of care. Other than that, women are more vulnerable to COVID-19 related economic effects because of existing gender inequalities. While most people live in the world have been negatively affected by the crisis, our analysis show that overall women jobs and livelihoods are more vulnerable to the COVID pandemic. The majority of the inequality is stricken using data and trends from unemployed surveys in the United States and India. Where gender discrete data are available, we estimate that female jobs loss rates due to COVID-19 are about 1.5 times higher than male jobs rates globally, at 5.7% versus 3.1% respectively. So across the globe, the data suggests that in the United States, women made up 46% of workers before COVID-19. Factory immunization effect suggests that women should make up 43% of job loss. However, unemployed data indicate that women make up 45% of the rural job loss today. So the nature of the work remains significant gender specific. Women and men tend to cluster in different occupations in both mature and emerging economies. This in turn shape of the gender implication of the pandemic. I'll analyze that show that female jobs are 90% more at risk than male ones simply because women are disproportionately represented in sector negatively affected by the COVID-19 crisis. We estimate that 4.5% of women unemployed is at risk in the pandemic globally, compared with 3.8% of men are employed just given the industry that men and women participate. So for this diagram, that reason is the women have more than the average share of employment in 3 or 4 most affected sectors, and measured by employment decline globally, compared with the aggregate share of women in global employment, 93.9%. Women have 45% of global jobs in the accommodation and food service, which are among the sectors worst affected by the crisis. 43% of jobs in retail of wholesale trade, and 46% in the other service, including the arts, recreation, and public administration. Subsectors such as the manufacturing, in which men are a large majority of those unemployed, have been severely affected. Other sectors such as education and healthcare, where women are the majority, have suffered relatively impact. So that's all my present. So I will close to the next present, Ishikai.
Hi, Miss. My name is Shikai, and now I'm going to present about the domestic supply interruptions in specific values change and markets. Although most of the countries consider agriculture and food to be crucial, many people also believe that limited labor mobility, such as seasonal migrant labor, cause supply disruptions, and that delicate farm goods suffer largest food wastage owing to practical issues and demand consequences. There are also 5 points rise in the food spoilage of grocery food, such as the fruit, vegetables, meat, and dairy. Although this estimate is speculative, statistical experience shows that loss have been significant in some circumstances and minor in others, making a reduction of 5% a realistic figure for the purpose of these investigations. To compensate for loss in operational effectiveness, the total factor productivity in transportation is expected to fall by 5%. This figure is based on observational data, including the GPS tracking device detection on track routes in the United States and the survey done in West Africa. This assessment at least offer rational indications of the amount of disruptions to the transportation industry, particularly in underdeveloped nations. Next. Besides that, in order to capture the impact of the oil war between Saudi Arabia and Russia at the end of 2019 and early 2020 before the COVID-19, they introduced an exogenous expansions of oil supply. The combined effects of increased oil supply and reduced demand caused by the COVID-19 crisis has led to a 25% drops in actual global energy price of crude oils and natural gas, and also a 17% drop in the price of refined oil and natural gas products. The containment measures caused by the in international freight and transport. In terms of the model parameters, this assumption has been translated into an increase in the average cost of international freight by 3%, and also not considering any feedback on the energy prices. They calibrate this number to capture the increased time required to trade because of the logistical delays in harbors and at the airports caused by the new regulations, lack of inspectors, and other restrictions associated with the pandemic. And next. So in conclusions, there are many impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on global poverty and inequality, including the extreme in global poverty, income inequality, domestic supply interruptions in specific value change and market, food security and food supply chain disruptions, gender inequalities being accessible, and social inequalities. From equality to global poverty, the COVID-19 will have effects on society and economies, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic will also affect the aspect of society, such as the schools were shuttered all around the world to prevent the illness from spreading. Nearly half of the world children are still impacted by the school cancellations 1 year after the pandemic began. And also many businesses have closed due to the pandemic, leading to the equivalence of the 255 million full-time job loss in terms of the working hours in 2020. Among the worst, the workers are in the informal economies, as well as the young people and women. Any economy recovery will likely be uneven, leading to greater inequality in coming years. Besides that, women are economically hit hardest by the pandemics because they account for a large proportions of sectors severely affected by COVID-19, including accommodations and food service, and the first line occupations such as health and social care sectors with the closures of schools. They also have to take on more care responsibilities at home, whether through the job loss or school closures. The pandemic threatened to undo decades of progress on gender equality. So that's all our presentations. Thank you.